皆様どうもこんにちは。弁護士の井上でございます。本日はアメリカの直接投資の関係でますます重要になってきておりますアメリカの労働組合のですね、法的な実情について、弊事務所のシカゴオフィスから、弁護士をですね、お招きした上で、現状をですね、外観をしてまいりたいと、このように考えております。では早速本論の方にですね、移らせていただきたいと思います。Yes, thank you for joining. And so we will discuss about the U.S. Labor Union situation. And the first question I would like to ask you is what is the basis of formation of labor union in the United States?
Thanks, Akira. So I think it'll help to give a little background on how unions came about and the history of unionization in the United States. It kind of started back in 1935 with the passage of the Wagner Act, which is now known as the National Labor Relations Act. And what the National Labor Relations Act does and did at the time is it grants most workers the legal right to join or form labor unions and bargain collectively with their employers. And it also prohibits employers from engaging in what's called unfair labor practices, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. But specifically, Section 7 of the NLRA allows employees to self-organize. They can form, join, or assist labor unions, and they can engage in collective bargaining. Section 8 of the NLRA makes it an unfair labor practice, or basically prohibits employers from interfering with or restraining those rights. And those rights, those collective rights under Section 7 kind of go beyond just unions specifically. It also really applies to any workers. So any workers who are, talking about wages, talking about working conditions, even if it's not specifically in the union context, are protected under the NLRA, and the employer cannot discipline or retaliate or take any action against employees just because they're engaging in what's called protected activity. The other thing the National Labor Relations Act did was it established the National Labor Relations Board, which the National Labor Relations Board is kind of the body the body that will hear any claims of unfair labor practices, any claims of violations of those Section 7 rights, or anything along those lines. And the members of that and of the NLRB are appointed by the U.S. president. So as you can imagine, the kind of policies and practices of the board kind of switch and change as the administrations change, every 4 years here in the U.S. The other kind of notable act or notable law that impacts unions is the Labor Management Relations Act, which was passed in 1947. Largely, that was done as in an effort to kind of balance the power between unions and employers. And it did a couple of things. It prohibited certain types of strikes that were going on prior to the passage of the LMRA. Things like unlawful strikes, unlawful threats, refusals to work, or what we call sit-down strikes, violent strikes, and any other types of strikes that had unlawful objectives. Under the Labor Management Relations Act, employees and unions can still engage in other types of strikes, such as economic purposes. For example, if employees or unions believe that employees aren't being paid fairly or paid enough, they can strike for those purposes. They can also strike as a result of unfair labor practices engaged in by the employer. So if the union believes that an employer is threatening employees or otherwise interfering with the rights that we just talked about, they can strike for that reason as well.
What is the treatment of unionship under federal and also state laws in the United States?
Yeah, so it's it's relatively consistent, but it is treated a little differently. So under federal law, employee or unions can create what's called union shops, and what a union shop is it essentially forces employees who work for that company to become members of the union and pay dues. Now, the Labor Management Relations Act allowed states to pass what's called right to work laws. And what those right to work laws do is prohibit those union shop agreements. So in states with right to work laws, employees who join a company that may be unionized do not necessarily have to become members of the union or pay union dues, even though they still have some of the protections of the union and would otherwise be are covered by any collective bargaining agreement that is in place at that employer with that union.
Thank you. So with that in mind, would you kindly tell how active, how vigorous labor union and labor union activity has been in the United States?
Yeah, so since back when the National Labor Relations Act was first passed in the 1930s, unions were very active. There was a very high percentage of unionizations, and in the 20-30 percentage rates. Now we've seen a sharp decline in unionization since then. In 2023, which is kind of the year we have the most data for, I should say 2024, the unionization rate was at 9.9%, which was basically the same or remained flat from 2023. Similarly, the number of workers who were represented by a union, as I talked about, there's the right to work states, individuals don't have to be members of a union, but they could still be represented by a union. They could still be covered by a union collective bargaining agreement. So that rate is about 11.1%, which again is pretty flat. We did see some more activity in unionization efforts, filing of election petitions and attempts by unions to organize companies or employees. We saw that increase a little bit under the Biden administration, but the overall union rates themselves and the number of elections that were actually won, that really did not increase much even during the kind of more union-friendly Biden administration, and we don't expect it to increase at all during the Trump administration either.
Great, thank you. And how frequent, how often the strike by the labor union is, and what is the effect and affected in business operation in general terms by that activity?
Yeah, the union strike frequency is there. In 2024, there was about 236 strikes, which is, if you compare that back to the 2005-2007 time period, we were looking at 400 strikes per year. So that's declined significantly. There is a significant impact on a business's operations, obviously, when workers are out on strike. There's issues with, publicity and bad PR that, with the information being published in newspapers and media coverage. There's also the issue of having to replace those striking workers. So if an employer or if a union does go out on strike or employees go out on strike, an employer does have the ability to replace those striking workers, and typically that replacement is considered to be on a temporary basis. So if the strike is, of a short duration, let's say a week, 2 weeks, a month, the employer can bring in temporary employees to replace those folks. But once the strike's over and whatever the issue has been resolved, the employees who are out on strike would be entitled to come back to work. Now, there are some exceptions to that where employers can permanently replace striking workers under the right circumstance. But as a general rule, that the stresses on the business are hey, we've got to hire, a large group of employees for temporary labor, and we can't necessarily promise them permanent employment as we typically would to be bringing in, new talent and new employees.
Thank you. And would you kindly share with a Japanese client to which extent a Japanese company should be careful about labor union when making whether or not to making investment into United States? Would you?
Yeah, so I think it's something to definitely be aware of. The concerns with having a unionized workforce are that unions are typically selling or trying to get employees to come on board and unionize a given company by promising an increase in wages, better benefits, more time off, and things along those lines. And obviously, that all will increase the cost of operations for the employer. On the flip side, the employer still gets to make the decisions regarding those wages and benefits and working conditions at the end of the day. While the union has some say in the ability to negotiate those, employers, have the ultimate say in what's being implemented, how much you're paying in wages, and what kind of benefits you're providing. So as a company investing in the U.S., it is something to be aware of. I don't think it's something to be overly concerned about, as that relationship, can be managed. The other issue for companies investing in the United States is a lot of times, if the management is engaged, supervisors are aware of what their employees are doing, talking about, and listening to concerns, you can oftentimes, avoid unions altogether by doing the right things, listening to the complaints your employees have, and taking action and showing people that, we care, we hear you, and we're doing what we can to make, this working relationship as good as it possibly can be. And a lot of times that will dissuade those folks who are maybe considering unions from either contacting the union in the first place or eventually voting for a union if there is a petition or something along those lines that's filed to make the employer a union company.
Great. 以上ですが、皆様いかがだったでしょうか。アメリカのですね、労働組合ですが、大変、今報道の対象になってもいまして、皆様心配をされているかもしれませんが、十分な対策をして、その上で、対策をする手段を講じた上で、投資をすると、これは十分可能だということで、その対策の方向性をですね、本講義を通じて掴んでいただけたのであればというふうに思います。また次回ですね、別の課題から、アメリカに対する直接投資の問題を扱ってまいりたいと思います。Stay tuned with Beaker and McKenzie. Thank you, JT, for sharing your quite insightful view about the labor union. Much appreciated. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.